Okay, so I think we're going to begin. More people might show up afterwards. Welcome to the Open Science session. I'm Micaela Crespo. I'm Open Access Coordinator at the University of Lausanne and a member of MCAA. I did my Marie Curie fellowship in Cambridge from 2014 to 2016, and after that I sort of dropped out of academia, so I'm not doing research anymore, but I'm doing research administration, if you wish. Within this role, I was part of the policy working group at MCAA for a couple of years, and now I've maybe stepped down a little bit from the association, but I'm still participating, and I am organizing the book project that you might have heard about. So open science, there's no clear definition of open science. It kind of depends on who's talking about it and what their role is. So the idea for this session was to kind of explore what open science means for different people in the academia world, I would say. So we would start with a researcher's point of view. What is open science? How does that help your research, and what's the impact? Then we'll hear from someone from Foster, which is an association that helps also, he will tell all about it, improve your research proposals, including open science in them. Then we'll hear from Ben, who comes from digital science and Almetric, who will present how open science can give us more comprehensive or maybe less biased metrics or ways to assess impact other than the impact factor. And finally, we will hear from Mr. Paul Ayris, who's coming from UCL, talking about how open science relates to an institution as a whole, a university as a whole, for instance. So I would like to invite our speakers, Paola, Masuzzo, if you can come on up. Ivo, you can take her place. I think we can all come already, and then we'll pass the mic. You can take the first seat. Ben, you can... It's okay? Yeah, be careful. And Paul, please. So Paola is an Italian Islander. Does that mean...
I come from an island.
Yeah.
I used to live on an island.
Good. And she has a great passion for coffee, big data, and open knowledge. She has a PhD in bioinformatics from Ghent University in Belgium, and she currently works as a data scientist for a for-profit corporation. In her free time, she does as much as she can do about open science. She's part of the Civic Lab Ghent, busy with the development and testing of the Open Science MOOC, which is great, by the way, and always advocating for equal opportunities and free knowledge. She hunts unicorns, talks a lot, and she likes George Constanza, apparently.
Here we go. I'm assuming I have to use this.
Yes, because we're recording.
Yeah, okay, good. I don't feel super comfortable sitting down, but okay. I hope more people will join, but given the complexity of this building, I'm assuming more people will find it later on. As Micaela just mentioned, in my free time I do a lot of stuff around open scholarship, and one of the projects I'm involved with is the Open Science MOOC, basically a project that's trying to build the resources and tasks for young researchers, or in general any researchers that wants to understand how to do science in the open. And when John Tennant, who's driving the project, asked me, as a part of the steering committee, what would your title be? I said, oh, I'm going to be Batman. If I can choose once in my lifetime to be Batman, just write it down, open source Batman. So with this in mind, today we're going to look at Batman. We're going to look at some dragons in the open scholarship. Incidentally, I have to talk about open scholarship, of course. The idea for this contribution starts from the fact that, given that in the last few years there's been a lot of conversation and a lot of discussions around the problematics, the advantages, and the difficulties of open scholarship, researchers sometimes come talk to me, and they tell me that they fear, they have some fears, some concerns for their research, for their career when it comes to share everything they do right in the open. So there have been some of these fears and these concerns that have become very much radicalized now, and they have really given birth to some myth. So you see here a bit of the points that I would like to discuss, but I'm not going to go through all of them for the sake of time, of course. I've just picked some of this, and this is how it's going to work. I will talk about something, I will present a red dragon, which is really driven by a fear or a concern, and most likely it's something that has become a myth. Maybe I talk already too loud. I'm Italian. Yeah. And then I'm going to give you Batman. So whatever it's known to actually be a fact that can be used to fight against this dragon. I would like to keep this a bit interactive, so please, if you have questions or comments along the way, I hope this is okay for you, Micaela, just interrupt me. Don't wait until the end of the talk and then the moment is gone, you feel shy or whatever. So I want to start talking about preprints. I think everybody here knows what preprints are. They're getting more and more important in the dissemination of scholarship output. Before you actually go and submit to a journal and your article gets peer-reviewed, you already put your article out there on a preprint server. Why would you do that? I will go very fast because I think it's obvious what are the benefits, but nevertheless, they are open access, everybody can see them, everybody can read them, so you attract visibility and impact. They help you advancing in your career. I've seen early career researchers putting out their articles on preprints and being approached by editors actually interested in publishing them, so we kind of reverse the traditional publishing model. And you can have comments from more than 2 or 3 reviewers, a wider community feedback, and this can definitely help you improving your research output when you really want to go and submit to a journal. The first dragon is, okay, if I put my article out there, somebody's going to scoop my research. They're going to copy whatever I did, they're going to be faster, they're going to be more lucky, it's going to be the end of me. So some people don't want to do this. I don't necessarily want to dismiss this fear or this concern. I just want to point out that this is a very, very specific fear that actually is very easy to understand, and it's also easy to prove that it's not going to happen. Chances for it to happen are very low. Because if you look at what happens when you actually submit your article to a journal, your manuscript goes to a journal, then the editor decides if it's worth to be peer-reviewed. The editor has to pick up the peer reviewers. You don't know who they are, most of the cases. There are gonna be some rounds of iteration. It's good enough, it's not good, it goes back and forth. In the end, it gets rejected. You try it with another journal. This means delay in scientific communication. This can take up to months, up to years sometimes, depending on the discipline, the journal, and so on and so forth. And along the way, you're not going to sit at your desk and not talk about your research with anybody, right? You go to conferences, you present posters, you have to. That's part of how you disseminate your scholarly output. So if along the way somebody would scoop your idea, or your article would get out of the editor's hands and goes and find their way on another desk or whatever, there will be zero track of provenance. It would be very, very hard to assess actually that that article was yours to begin with. When you do this through a preprint, you take your manuscript, in parallel with a traditional submission to a journal, you put it on a preprint server. At that exact time, you have a timestamp. You say, this is my research, this is my name, this is my code, my data, my results. If along the way somebody gets your article and reproduce or reports your results without acknowledging them to you, without citing you, that's scientific misconduct. That's plagiarism, that's something that has very little to do with how you have released your research. The other thing is impact factor. I think we're going to be hearing about it a bit later today, I have the feeling. I just want to say, I hope everybody knows why the journal impact factor was born. This was born to get librarians the idea where it's worth to put our budget. What are the glamorous magazines we should definitely buy subscriptions for? At a certain point, this metric became a metric to assess research quality and sometimes researchers' quality. So this is the big dragon. you publish in a high impact factor journal, your research is top-notch, is the best. Not sure. So if you have ever looked at citation distributions, the first thing that you will notice is that they are immensely skewed. So this means that to take a metric which is an average, statistically, you don't understand what that means. Statistically, that doesn't make any sense. So to begin with, the metric is flawed. And then the metric has been used for a purpose that was never designed for in the first place. There are also studies that have shown that actually, even without retraction, top journals still publish the least reliable science. And there have been studies that have shown that, yes, there is a correlation between publishing in high impact factor journals and advancing in your career, but this correlation does not imply causation. And for example, here, what I'm showing from a nice blog from Brems is that if you plot, at least for the, this is for neuroscience studies, the impact factor and the statistical power, there is no correlation of the studies. The argument is then, okay, but somebody has come to me and has told me many times, you want to become a PI, you want to become a professor, you need to publish in Nature, in Science, in Cell. I've been told that myself. We could go on and on talking about this type of bullying behavior, but I will not do that because then I would get very upset and a very unpleasant person to talk with. Instead, what I would like to point out is that, as I said before, this correlation between publishing in Nature, Cell and Science and having a faculty position does not imply causation. The people sitting in the evaluation committees are the same people that they know that you need to publish in those journals to become a PI. So you see there that there is definitely some factors missing in the equation. If you change the impact factor, is this going to help your application? Maybe yes, but maybe not as much as you think. So I guess the message here for me is, rather than chasing the impact factor, make sure you do proper research, fair research, transparent, reproducible research. The impact factor will follow if it has to follow. Unless you found your own very nice, glamorous magazine and you call it Cell, Nature and Sense, and then you're all set. Predatory journals. You know what predatory journals are. As Micaela was saying, I'm a big George Costanza and Seinfeld fan, so when I found that somebody published in a predatory journal just for the sake of reporting a Seinfeld-based episode in a scientific journal, that I find it's absolutely amazing and hilarious. So you are tricked into publishing with them, but they do not offer you any editorial or peer review or publishing services that supposedly you're paying for. The dragon here is, and that's what I also have heard a lot, maybe now a bit less, open access has been the main root cause for predatory journals. Well, first and foremost, the articles published by predatory journals constitute a very little percentage of the overall open access published articles. You can actually check very easily, for example, using resources like the Directory of Open Access Journal. And I have put you there a link. I hope the slides are going to be shared afterwards. A very useful resource of this spreadsheet, because there have been some journals recently that they say they are registered in the Directory of Open Access while they're not. So they use the logos, why they should not. There are resources out there that help the community and that help researchers. And there has been a very interesting recent study showing that if you take the criteria, the Bell's criteria, which are pretty subjective, to define if a journal is a predatory one or not, this criteria could very well be applied also to non-open access journals, which are considered of high quality in the library and information science. So very specific domain, but still. And it's very easy to spot them. So if you're doubting, is this a predatory journal or not, you use resources like Think, Check, Submit that can definitely help you. And I just want to be a bit provocative here and saying, are really researchers tricked into publishing in predatory open access journals? Not necessarily. Researchers can be the victims, researchers can be the predator. We are all being complicit of this publish or perish, which by the way has been now publish and perish anyway. So these type of models, they're just replying or they're just answering to a demand which is there, which is publish as much as you can. Does open access need to break the bank? So this is the last kind of myth or fear or concern that I would like to address. I'm definitely not going to talk about open access or how you can do it, all the different colors you have. I've put here a reference to this very nice article from last year, very recent, that illustrates how you can obtain open access with different routes. One of the things that I want to say here is that the open access citation advantage, that's not a myth. There have been more than one study now that says if you publish open access, you will be cited more, which doesn't take genius to understand, because then potentially you have way many more people looking at your research, right? So what you see there is a graph from this article that basically shows, if you look at the average relative citations worldwide, the gray bar, those are closed behind paywall, those get on average 90%, 10% less citation than the rest. While if you go up to the open access paper, on average, these are 18% above the world average relative citation, with different then shades, if it's a green open access, if it's a bronze, if it's hybrid, and so on and so forth. What people think most of the times is that, okay, where are we going with open access publishing is that we're going to have to pay a lot of article processing charges, APC's model, and this is going to break the bank, we don't have money, this is not sustainable. Fair enough. I just want to point out that 70% of the journals currently reported in the Directive of Open Access journals do not have an APC, so they are free open access journals. If you really look at the current implementation of APC-driven model publishing, this is actually quite moving away from, you know, the Budapest or the primary definition of what open access was about. And potentially, I personally believe that this can lead into a system where the rich get richer and the poor get poorer, so I don't believe that's the direction we should go, especially for hybrid models, because unless you are George Costanza, and I hope there are some Seinfeld fans in the room, nobody likes double dippers. You dip into the sauce, you dip it once. You don't charge subscription and charge again for APC. Self-archiving costs zero, so if you really don't have the money to publish in an open access journals that requires APC, ask yourself, can I publish the preprint? Yes or no? Can I publish the postprint? Yes or no? If the answer is no to both questions, if possible, reconsider another journal, if possible. And with this, I am done, and Batman rules and the dragons are defeated, I hope.
Thank you, Paola. I think we'll leave the discussion for the end afterwards, but that was very interesting. Next up, we have Ivo. Ivo holds a PhD in marine science, currently fundraising for Denmark's National Institute of Aquatic Resources at DTU. He advocates for applying open science knowledge transfer and science literacy principles to marine and climate research for both individual career benefit as well as institutional visibility and greater societal impact. As part of H2020 Foster, he runs the He runs the Open Science Clinic, advising public fund grant applicants how to gain a competitive edge with open science knowledge, transfer science literacy, and optimize the synergies between full disclosure of public funded research and traditional intellectual property rights practices. That was a mouthful. And you could take that one. And yeah, thank you.
So it makes me look like a loser.
Yeah.
Am I on now? No.
Hello?
Okay. So I thank you for the introduction. It is a mouthful. I hope you like superheroes, because where there's Batman, there's always some awkward guy following up as a sidekick. So that's kind of me for the next 20 minutes or so. As Micaela said, one thing that I do is through an European project, we run the Open Science Clinic, and the Open Science Clinic is essentially trying to help people like you connect open science best practice, the way the researchers practice them, with what might serve you well in what the funders want, and see if that has some kind of short-term benefit for you for raising the funds that you need to kick off your career and build that research group around it. So we don't have, in 20 minutes, I can't run that for you, but if there is any appetite following the session, then I'm sure we can organize it with MCAA as a virtual webinar. But instead what I can do is I want to take you on a bit of an imaginary journey, and I'm going to follow on with the myth busting, and I'm going to focus on one myth, and one myth that despite everything you might have heard over the last 2 days on open science and how emerging it is, one prevalent myth still is that open science is a trend that will blow over, or it has no impact on your career. Before I take you there, I just want to give you a bit of a background where I come from professionally and where does my observation and data come from. If we were to crudely describe the research pathway as the width of this stage, and if all the master students and the bachelors are piled way high up there, then the first third might be the graduate schools. And the graduate schools will start processing that mass and start churning out PhDs. And in the middle, this desk might be the postdoc stage of that career, with all the tenures out there and the Nobel laureates probably across the street. So in that crude representation, I am somewhere in the middle. And I am not the Batman of open science. I don't practice everything I preach. But my role is to download the wisdom in that head of somebody who's actually practicing it, and see how much of that is applicable to your struggles if you are emerging, just graduated researcher, PhD. So I try to help PhDs coming out of the grad school, the postdocs struggling to bridge this funding death valley and remain in research. So with that in mind, one of the two tragedies that we encounter on a daily basis is that if we position ourselves at the end of where the graduate schools do their work, and what is the output of that? And the first strategy is that PhDs come out and they have a bit of a shock what it takes to fund themselves through this career pathway and reach the position that they are aiming at, or build their research group around them. Unfortunately, graduate schools don't see open science as a strategic advantage. They do train too often researchers in this publish or perish philosophy, which in itself is not unfixable. These are smart guys like yourselves and girls, and if they can go for a PhD, we can teach them anything they need to know to fund themselves through this conveyor belt. But the problem is that their definition of excellence is mismatching what the funders define as excellence. Graduate schools too often come out of the conveyor belt. The PhDs come out of the graduate conveyor belt, rather, and they walk into offices like mine, where we are the grant support people, the professionals helping you along. And the young researchers will come along with the view that if they know how to write a paper, that in itself encapsulates research excellence, and if they have many of them and in high impacting journals with all the caveats that you heard and will probably hear about, then that is enough, and then they deserve a career for life. And funders disagree. And funders disagree with that passively and actively. And all you have to do is look at what they expect out of individual fellowships, out of consortium grant, out of large project grants, in terms of excellence. How do they define excellence? And yes, publishing in papers is one skill set, but explaining your research in societal context and the skills that go along with it, the soft skills that go along with it, those are the skills that will be responsible for 1/3 of the points you're going to win in order to secure grants. And too often, both senior researchers mentoring PhDs and the graduate schools which they lead are a little bit ignorant and passive about this trend. Too many responsible people for graduate schools are quite happy to believe that open science will blow over. Now, I think at this point, we need to make a disclaimer. I have no illusions that open science in itself will fix this problem. But if you think that it will blow over or it has no contribution to career progression, that's really living in an illusionary world. And we demonstrate that on a daily basis, where we will take a willing researcher wanting to go through, to fund themselves individually. We will take the best practices that you heard about for data, for code, for papers. We'll apply them to all the outputs of your research. We will not stop at papers. We'll apply the same best practices. And the power of open science is that it can cross over between what you may define as research excellence now and reproducibility and excellent research method and rigor. And it will cross over into societal impact purely through reuse and access and feeding open innovation. For those of you who were in the Future of Research session this morning, there are some really great examples. So that's where I'm really from. And if I can ask you to step into my shoes, then this is what you would see. If you were to extrapolate this trend, let's say 5 or 10 years into the future, when you'll be mid-career and you'll be responsible for this conveyor belt, if you like, you'll be pulling the levers and you'll be oiling the wheels, what might you see? And I want you to really go into imagination mode. When I go in there, what I see, what I imagine is at the far end here, a graduate school that actually proactively trains young researchers, mentors them into all aspects of open science because it directly feeds into excellent research, but it also gives them context to put their research in societal impact. And imagine that senior researchers are actually supporting and mentoring young researchers on open science practices, and an evaluation framework and evaluation system that actually rewarded that mentorship. Imagine that somewhere down this line, tenure positions expected that you as a senior researcher have to have a proven track record in open science and a proven track record in mentoring young researchers in those practices. And imagine that open science can give you a small but definitive competitive edge when it comes to raising grants on a regular basis and building that group and reaching to wherever your target is in terms of research progression on this side. Now, all this might sound completely imaginary, but it's an imaginary trip with its feet firmly on the ground. As we speak today, we have the proof that you can win in a highly competitive world like Marie Curie individual fellowships and ITN. You can add a competitive edge to grants if you implement open science practices and the collection of them, not just open access. If you implement them well, right across from designing your research method to arguing for strong societal impact, right? Painting that pathway of how the research you're going to publish in any journals will actually have a downstream impact to society. That is no longer imaginary. We have heard through a number of sessions today about an evaluation system that doesn't just count but rewards connections, right? And there's at least 2 research projects that are trying to figure out a more equitable algorithm that will reward you if you were to perform open science practices as part of your research and if you were to mentor. Of course, there's no solution yet, but give it 5 or 10 times. you know, how do you think you're going to be evaluated for tenure? Would it be the same as today? And the third point escapes me. But the basic message is this, is that if you talk to a grant officer near you who is well informed of, you know, where is research going, what do the funders want, you will find some uncomfortable and honest answers. And my message to you is that if you trust that trend, the graduate students sitting in a graduate school now are potentially at a disadvantage. They are not being trained in these skills, and they are left a little bit on their own devices. And when they graduate, they get a bit of a culture shock. You know, as well as graduate schools being responsible for that, in my opinion, I think partly it is also it falls onto you as the future custodians of this conveyor belt to step by step, one try at a time, one grant at a time, one paper at a time, one research experiment at a time, to prove how we can implement these open science practices at a systematic level. Thank you.
Thank you, Ivo. I have a question about your speech, but we'll maybe open the question session with that in a minute. Next up is Ben McLeish. Ben is Director of Outreach and Engagement for Europe at Digital Science, where he divides his time between the Dimensions Research Intelligence Service and Altmetric. He has worked across academic publishing, sales, search, and discovery services for research systems and services for 15 years, although he only vaguely remembers some of the early years. Apparently, you're not the only one, so. There you go.
Thank you very much. Just a record, since this is being recorded and people have decided not to sit in the middle, just in case the camera is not capturing the audience. There are some people here, so. I promised that I would start with a joke about the impact factor. You are in a room, and across from you is a man whose finger is on the button to delete all the impact factors that there have ever been. What sandwich do you make? We already had some of the impact factor stuff talked about before. I've been thinking a lot about this metric recently, especially when it comes to things like open science, because as you can see from the fascinating definition you get from Wikipedia from a few days ago and the elaborate algorithm that's there, it obviously is taking all the wrong things into account and measuring the wrong unit of research in order to be able to work out how research has actually had an impact and whether it's actually the research that's being measured. Nobody outside of this room and no one outside of academia knows what this is. They have never heard of it. I didn't hear about it until I fell into academic publishing. And it's not going to change. They're not going to learn about it either in the future because it's largely and completely irrelevant when it comes to public engagement with research, when it comes to measuring the way that research interacts with the world. And I'm going to make the point that I think you should also forget this metric as well. I'm coming from a very different background when it comes to talking about open science. I'm not a scientist. I was never a researcher. I can't calculate an H-index for you. I can barely describe it when I'm sober, let alone now. And instead, I'm coming at it the following way. For open research and open science to be something that could have some meaningful metrics attached to it, those metrics themselves have to be open. They have to be openly accessible. They can't sit behind a paywall where members of the public could never come across them. They do need to measure public as well as academic engagement with research. That is not something that the impact factor has ever pretended to even do. And they should, be part of the general infrastructure of the web. It is so boring now to even mention this, but research is borderless, it is interconnected, it interacts with different units of research around the world. A grant can be linked to a publication that results from it. A publication can be connected to a patent that has been inspired by that research, even if the patent itself doesn't come from the researcher or from the same institution or even from the same country, and very regularly not even from the same discipline or field of research. And since this interconnectedness has largely taken off thanks to the internet, that's probably where some of these open metrics should live. We obviously value networks of information, otherwise we wouldn't have had a citation graph invented, we wouldn't have had another citation graph invented after that, and probably a third or a fourth as well if you could include Google and the one that digital science built. So that's the very basic question I'm going to ask. Why are we measuring research outputs? Mostly by one type of output, so a journal article, and one type of metric, one that doesn't even measure the article, one that measures the journal instead. And so I wanted to delve in very quickly into what digital science does, and then if we have time and we feel it's relevant, then we actually put some statistics together for Austria, just to see what you can do with this kind of data. The very first thing is that, as Micaela mentioned, one of the sub-companies of digital science is called Altmetric. And I was thinking a lot about this service today as I was sitting in the session on RRI, where people are being asked to be measured on engagement with the public, on engagement with policy advisors and policy bodies, and the general dissemination of science to somewhere other than the academy, somewhere outside of the ivory tower. It's a very nice tower, but one must get out every now and again. And to that end, we actually have a service that has been, for almost 10 years, tracking where research is mentioned online within social media. Who has a Twitter account, by the way, by a show of hands? It's not enough. You should all have your hands up, and I'll explain why. Because it's easy to sneer at social media. There was a story this morning on my Apple News feed that mentioned the death of 900 people due to measles. Why do you think that happened? This is, after all, the 21st century. Vaccines are well understood, aren't they? The opening session yesterday morning, who was there? What was the joke about climate change? Well, we all believe in it here, don't we? So why is it that that even had to be said in the 21st century, when we are in the most recent 5 years being the hottest there have ever been? It is because of fake news, exactly. It's because the consumption of what is thought to be research is happening outside of controlled environments of academic discourse. And that has to be corrected. And so therefore, the fight that you have ahead of you will not happen solely and exclusively on the pages of the research article that you are being demanded to produce. It requires you, no one else, to go out and disseminate the research in the language, in the lingua franca of people like me, people who need to have stuff explained to them and need to have it explained regularly and probably re-explained once I've tried to paraphrase what you've just said. Because the result of not doing that is literally deaths. It really does impact human beings. Anybody who sneeringly says, yeah, but what does impact mean? I would say that that is one form of impact, is human life, or indeed the ecology, or whatever it is. And so I was thinking a lot today about how researchers are expected to be able to know which policy bodies have even interacted with their research. It could be that they're making use of your research and you didn't know. It's not the kind of thing you can Google. And that's the reason why we built Altmetric. We found, by the way, 100 million references to research over the last 10 years for, I think it's like 12 million articles and data sets and things like that. So there's a lot of talk happening out there. And it should be that the academics are heavily involved in that. So that's the first of the open science metrics. By the way, the Altmetric data you will find openly available online. It's designed so that researchers can make use of it openly without having to log in. You'll find it on 9,000 different journal homepages on each individual article where this research has been talked about online. Has it appeared in policy? Has it made its way to patents? Is it being used on Wikipedia? I'll rephrase that. Is it being used correctly on Wikipedia? That's the kind of thing you should be checking as well. You wouldn't believe the amount of, well, you probably would believe the amount of misuse that there is out there. So this is different kinds of use of research. And then we also developed a few other metrics that are probably a little bit more palatable to the academic community that's not quite yet sure about things like, do I need to be tracking where news organizations and blogs and perhaps the faculty of 1,000 are talking about our research? we then also decided, well, if we're going to badmouth the impact factor openly and publicly, loudly, for a long time, we should probably think of ways in which we can reimagine how research interacts with each other just in the standard way, articles referring to articles. And so what we did was we created a whole new re-indexed and open citation graph. We found about 1 billion citations. We made it openly available. Ask me afterwards and I'll tell you where to get it. I'm not going to try and grandstand our products too much. And then we realized that one of the issues with the way that attendant metrics for research have been treated in the past is it still comes back to the journal. So we have an impact factor that sort of measures the average citations over 2 years and puts it on a journal level. But then we have like field citation behaviors as well. How does this article behave in terms of citations for its field? And the definition of that field used to also come from, and still does come from, the journal. So if you publish in the Journal of Chemical Engineering, well, this is probably in chemistry or engineering or both. But what if it's published in Nature or Science? Is the subject there for general or interdisciplinary or multidisciplinary? Yes, it is, based on the fact that the journal container uses that description. So what we did instead was we took millions of, tens of thousands of items that had been coded according to fields of research. Researchers had read them and said, yes, this is actually in biology, or this is in law, or economics, finance, whatever it is. And then we trained an artificial intelligence to then apply those fields of research to as yet unread full texts, so that we could have at least a grouping of what really is in the physical sciences, rather than the names and fields that the journals themselves come from. And then we applied what's called a field citation ratio. We said, well, this article here, based on the other actual articles that really are from that field, is cited more or less than one would expect for that field, which we think is an important granularity that, that researchers should be able to access. And those numbers are also publicly available. They should be used flagrantly in your CVs. We don't demand attribution. Just go and, well, there are terms and conditions, but you don't have to pay anything, and they are easily openly discoverable. And then we also helped the NIH with the relative citation ratio. So this gets a bit wonky now, but we look at articles that are also cited in the same reference list as your item, or an item. And then we try and judge how that behaves in terms of citations compared to other items that are cited alongside it normally. So your neighbors, for example, in a reference list. A journal article refers to you and 10 other items. You're actually cited more or less than that item as well. So we did that because the unit of assessment of open science, if we are going to do one, probably should at least have a couple of contenders that are at the item level, at the article level itself. We also, like I say, we released that citation graph because I, for one, used to get really annoyed when I wanted to see citation behaviors of an article being confronted with the thing on the left. It's not open, it's asking you to log in. Hey, there are 10 citations for this publication. Click on it, please log in. Well, I don't belong to an academic institution, I'm a member of the public. It would be interesting to see the web of connections of items. No, sorry, I've got to have an institutional affiliation. We instead said, no, we're going to release everything that we have found in a citation graph. Anybody can use it. That's super important. And to that end, we actually, when we released that, we signed DORA as a supplier. And I was in a talk this morning where DORA was mentioned. They said, well, why haven't more institutions signed DORA? And I was thinking, well, actually, why haven't all the vendors signed DORA as well, the declaration of, I'm going to embarrass myself now. Oh, yes, indeed, there's no research. It's the O that always confuses me. Is it open or of? It's very important that is done because, and I think actually if you belong to an institution that has signed DORA, you should demand of your suppliers that they sign DORA. And if they don't, you should cancel them or threaten to. I think that would be quite important. Okay, fine. Metrics. Everyone loves numbers. The higher, the better, I believe, is the right, isn't it? High numbers are good numbers. That's right. Andrew Wakefield would be in on that one, wouldn't he, with his high numbers of citations of his retracted article. We had a look at open versus closed publications in Austria. Austrian institutions, Austrian funded open access, things like that, just for fun. we found a couple of interesting points. So we've got things like how many are cited versus how many are not cited at all, and the difference between open and closed. I won't read these out to you, but if you want copies of them, of course, we are going to distribute at a cost of €5 per person, the graphs at the end. But we were able to have a look at how many publications there are, how many have actually been mentioned on the social web, social media, news, blogs, Wikipedia, Faculty of 1,000, policy, patents, things like that. Just however, what's the sort of cut-through rate of that? Versus the same numbers if it was closed as well. And there you can see the average, relative, and field citation ratios as well. Fairly interesting. It shows, to my mind at least, my untrained, unstatistical mind, that open access works really well. There's a couple of different reasons why that's true, of course. One is that the amount of open access is, of course, increasing. We saw that lovely graph from before. So obviously, then, the citations are probably going to track with that, right? And the attention is going to track with that. But another very obvious reason is that, well, if something's open, then really anybody can read it. And they hopefully will. And they will certainly share it. And those people who get it shared can then also read it, and so forth. We were dividing this down by all the different exciting versions of open access we have these days, bronze being the one that gets people really furious at the moment, gold all the way through to green, self-archived, and hybrid, and things like that, so that you can see the behaviors there as well, and how they are compared to their field. So over here I can see that it looks like hybrid open access tends to do rather well when you take an item compared to the expected items in that field. That field citation ratio, of course, being regardless of whether it's in open or closed. So that seems to suggest that open items do get cited more by other open items as well. You can even divide this resulting from grants. So one thing that digital science has done for a while is to track where grants have gone. Who has been awarded a grant, what institution did they belong to, what publications resulted from it. That's a really key one, because we hope that people will start inventing new kinds of metrics, like how many citations do we get per grant won, for example, or how many publications do we see per grant at our institution, or within the whole field in which those grants are falling. This one I really like as well. This is number of gold open access items mentioned in patents. So a direct connection between the publications and innovation. The innovation actions of the Horizon 2020 program define it, last time I checked, purely as number of patents produced. So here you have a connection between where a patent was filed, doesn't matter who filed it or where it was, and the publications that they're actually referring to. Critical stuff if we're going to be looking at innovation and demonstrating to our grant givers that we had some effect. And then University of Vienna, where we are today, of course, the publications mentioned in patents by volume. So you can see there we're able to divide out automatically without the university telling us, we haven't spoken to the university about any of this, what fields of research, what disciplines their publications are in, and how they behave when you have a look at the method of publication as well. Lastly, and then I'll cut this short because I'm running out of time. This is what Austrian research looks like in terms of the social web. This is all the mentions on Twitter and Facebook and Google Plus and Reddit and YouTube videos and so forth. As I began my conversation by saying, I don't think you can afford to miss out on what people are saying about the research, how they might be using it, how they might be misusing it. And so that is a reason why we actually focus on something beyond the numbers. We give you what is actually being said, not the so that the problem with citations always was you didn't know whether they were positive or negative. So we will always show you what the news item was and what it said and the link to it and what research it was talking about. It doesn't matter what language it's in because we're detecting links out there. We will pick up social feeds like tweets. This is the kind of stuff that researchers have an immensely hard time finding. They are always surprised when they see our data for the first time. They can't believe they didn't have it before. And this is something that I hope that the industry can help researchers with as they battle to engage the public, to correct misinterpretations of data or flat out misuse of data, and that they can also, on the other end, then use that engagement and that attention that they've received to demonstrate, well, look, this was public engagement, this mattered, this made a difference, this created conversations, and so forth. I'll leave it there and hand over to Paul. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ben, for such an engaging presentation. I'm a witness. I know he can do it even driving and parking and not harming anyone. So thank you very much. So the next one and last speaker is Paul Ayris. He's Vice Provost at UCL. He joined UCL in 1997. Dr. Ayris was the president of LIBER, the Association of European Research Libraries, from 2010 to 14. He is co-chair of the LERU, League of European Research Universities, Info Community. He chairs the OAI Organization Committee for the CERN UNIGE, or University of Geneva, Workshops and Innovations in Scholarly Communication, which is coming up this summer. He's also chair of GIS Collections Content Strategy Group, and on 1st of August 2013, he became chief executive of UCL Press. He's a member of the Provost and President Senior Management Team at UCL, and he has a PhD in Ecclesiastical History and publishes on English Reformation Studies. Thank you.
Thanks. It's ecclesiastical history, actually, yeah. Oh, okay, so thanks very much for the invitation. I've been asked to finish the session by trying to explain how institutions embrace open science and what difference open science has meant to us as research-intensive universities, as employers of researchers, as disseminators of knowledge and wisdom across the world, and as people who want to engage with society. Thanks. So I'll use the 8 pillars of open science as defined by the European Commission. They include in their definition scholarly publishing, so that's scholarly communication, the importance of research data alongside the publication as a record of research output, the skills required to engage in open science, the policy position, that's research integrity, which underpins open science practice at an institutional level or in a subject area. Rewards and recognition, how do individuals get rewarded for engaging in open science activities? What metrics, the concept that Ben has been talking about, how do you measure success in an open environment? And then the big societal piece, citizen science, how do universities react or relate to society in an open science environment? LERU, the League of European Research Universities, has produced an open science roadmap. I must confess, I was the editor of the roadmap. I chaired the editorial party that launched the roadmap last year in June with 41 recommendations for universities on what universities as institutions can do to benefit from open science practices, and we're taking this forward at the moment with colleagues in these 23 LERU institutions to produce an implementation plan for open science activity at institutional level. I'm going to give a number of reasons why open science is important for universities, why these 23 research-intensive institutions, why their rectors have all said that open science is the future of our universities, and we need to change in order to embrace open science practices and to enjoy the benefit that open science. Go ahead. What I'm saying.
It's back. It's back. It's back.
It's back. It's back. Right. Okay. Perhaps I should hurry up, and then I will finish before it runs out again. Okay. I blame Brexit, but then I blame Brexit for most things. So let's carry on. It delivers what Open Science delivers on your mission and your strategy. So this is the 2019 UCL research strategy written by my colleague. Okay, I'll try. Okay, so the strategy explicitly emphasizes open science requirements. It's meant to foster open and engaged research. How do we do that? With policies and developments and open access, most notably the establishment of UCL Press, which I'm going to come on and talk about, as the UK's first fully open access university press, and open science. So open science is embedded in the research mission of the university, and it acts as a framework. And if they quote the German because in an open science environment that simply doesn't work. Nothing replaces individual reflective judgment where you read the paper and make the decision yourself. The second reason why universities think it's important is that open science reveals impact. And I said I would talk a little bit more about UCL Press, the UK's first fully open access university press. It was founded in 2015, and when I made the business case for founding an institutional press, these were the reasons that I put to the provost and his senior team. I wasn't then a member of the senior team, although I am now. And I said, no, these are, if we were to start a university press, these are the main benefits that UCL would gain by making that investment. And the one in the middle was the single most important one that got everybody's attention because of the global impact that our publications have. And we measure this currently by downloads. So we downloaded our outputs, mainly research monographs. I'm a historian by training, so we started in the research monograph field. Our monographs are downloaded in 229 countries, so in practically every country and territory in the world. We've had 100 books published in the 3 years. We're currently publishing about 50 books a year, and these have had a total of 1.8 million downloads over those 3 years. You can use league tables to show those benefits if that's what you want to do, and I did do that with this particular metric. So this is our first textbook that we published in UCL Press. It's a textbook from, I'm going to try again. It's a textbook on burns and plastic surgery from our master's course in the Royal Free Hospital, which is one of the teaching hospitals that my university uses. And we put copies, the full text of all our open access monographs and textbooks on the JSTOR platform, as well as housing them in our institutional repository, UCL Discovery. So those are the two main sources for open access books that we use to disseminate our copy. And putting our books, our e-books on JSTOR, freely available as open access books, they became the most downloaded open access books in JSTOR of all the e-books that they of all the open access e-books that they host, and they host altogether about 12 million academic articles and books. So that was a sign for my institution of the global impact that an open access institutional press can have, alongside having downloads in 229 countries, 18 downloads in North Korea. The only contact my university has with North Korea is the downloads from UCL Press, and one download in Vatican City. So His Holiness must be reading something. This is the most downloaded book from UCL Press by Danny Miller, who is our professor of anthropology. How the World Changed Social Media. It's the product of a European Research Council grant. He's been downloaded 300,000 times since this book was published in 2016, and he's also sold, because we do sell print copies for those who want to buy print copy. He's sold over 500 copies. If you were to sell a research monograph over the bookshop counter, the average number of sales would be around 200, because the market for research monographs is so niche. But open access is a transformative model for monograph publishing, because it's improved the impact the article is having by the number of downloads, and it's not eroding. In fact, it's increasing the print sales. So it is that's why universities think open science is important, because it transforms the way that the knowledge and wisdom that they're producing and paying for through academic salaries is disseminated across the world. A university to get its message out into the environment, to get society engaged with real research, not with fake news and not with alternative facts. And they were erected, those 23, they were erected to see citizen science, one of those 8 pillars of open science, as a really powerful way of redefining how a university makes a contribution to society. And the example I give is our Transcribe Benton project in UCL. It engages with members of the public from across the world in the online transcription of the original manuscript papers of Jeremy Bentham, the 19th century utilitarian philosopher and thinker. This is an example of his rather horrendous handwriting at the bottom of the screen. Our volunteers have transcribed more than 20,000 pages of Bentham's writings at very high levels of accuracy, because the transcripts that come from members of the public are checked by an editorial team, and then they form part of a printed edition of Bentham's collected works. Bentham's important in an open science context because he's the man who actually invented the word international. He's the first person to think of it. And so open science is a way of delivering on that kind of agenda in terms of the breadth of his vision and ambition. The fourth reason, the final reason I workflow for a researcher. The researchers here on the left-hand side, and they're producing outputs, and the outputs are listed on the right-hand side. And there are publications, and the researcher can choose whether to make them available as gold open access or green open access. I'm using just those two colours as an output for publication. But in an open science environment, you can do the same with data. And this is what we're doing in my institution, because on the data piece, where you want to make your data open, you can store it in an institutional storage and dissemination facility. And that's what we're building in UCL, the UCL Research Data Repository. It goes live next month in March, where data is open by default and linked to the accompanying publication as well. So you can see the publication and the data side by side, and that's important for the principle of reproducibility in an open science environment where you not only take the author's word for it, you actually look at the data and then try and reproduce what the findings are, to see whether the findings in the publication are valid and supported by the data, which is the building block on which those conclusions were made. In a research area like mine, like history, 16th century history, I'm a Tudor historian, I had an interesting conversation about this cultural change that's required to see data alongside publication as an equally important output. I was talking to one of our professors at UCL who just published a book on European history. I said, great to see the book, thanks very much for sharing it. Pity it's not open access, but anyway, it's good to have the book, thanks very much. Are you going to make the data available as well, so we can see the data alongside the publication? And he thought for a minute and said, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to make the data available. Can you guess what he said, why he said that? What was his reason for not wanting to release the data? He didn't have the good answer. It wasn't his answer, it's a good answer. I've heard it before as well. No, he said, I'm not going to release the data because if I release the data, people will read it. And it will come to a different conclusion, perhaps, from the one I've come to in my book. And I think that's a really bad research practice, because isn't the point of research to open a discussion about truth in any given subject area? It's not about being right. It's about sharing your data and your conclusion and engaging in a dialogue. But in my area of history, apparently that is not understood with the purpose of research. Being right is more important than sharing. Okay, so in conclusion, why do institutionally open science is good? It's good for the researcher, it's good for the educator, and it's good for the consumer. And it's good for research as a whole, because the best research is open research. And open science, therefore, is an opportunity and not a threat. Thanks for listening.
Time for questions now, but I would like to start first off, perhaps with a short one for myself. With respect to downloads and at a different scale to the UCL Press, we see that also in our repository, our institutional repository, we see people coming from everywhere all over the world. A particularly elusive country is Greenland, for some reason, but they do come from time to time and download stuff that is sometimes in French, in the university the local language is French, and we have a very large proportion of humanities and social science scientists, which publish in their native language, which is French. So it's a good way of showing them that A, they can publish in French and they can still be read, and B, that doing open access and putting your copies in the repositories are actually a useful thing and that you're read, because sometimes there's a misconception that if you deposit something in a repository, then it's some sort of black hole and no one will find it anymore. But tying this to the talks and how open science can help researchers, I believe the key to everything is the evaluation process, as we've spoken. As long as we're judging researchers, like where they publish, not what they how do we move away from impact factors? It's helping us. Go ahead, whoever.
It's a $1 million question. I don't have the answer for it, but I can think of a couple of things. First being that, like we were already mentioning in a session on the future of research earlier today, it's true that it's super important that the next generation of scientists, the current generation of scientists, gets trained in open science and open science practices very early on. You don't have to go through the last year of your PhD before you realize what this is all about. But I still believe that we need leaders that say the right words and they mean it. They mean these words. So there is a huge portion, and this is coming from my personal experience, of current PIs and PhD supervisors that also need to be trained in open science. To think about this open science curricula only for young researchers, I don't think it's enough. A lot of PhD students, junior PhD students, they don't feel entitled to stand up on their feet and say, screw the impact factor, I'm going to do my way. They need to have the support of their supervisor. If you don't, I don't feel like blaming any student that comes to me and tells me, this is all great, I can't do it because I'm all alone. Then you do what you can do. Every little cent that you can put in the pot counts. So I still believe that the supervisors that are about to be retired, natural evolution, that disappears sooner or later, but there's still a good portion of people out there that needs to be trained in this. And I don't like the idea of part of this training that being mandated necessarily, but if it's, again, obligement or this mandation that we need to put in place, that has to happen. Yeah. I'll leave the floor to Jennifer.
Well, I can answer with the types of answers I've received from my colleagues in my university when I put your questions to them. We are in the process of evolving a new bibliometrics policy for the institution. It's out for informal consultation at the moment. It is based on the San Francisco Declaration and on the Leiden Manifesto about the responsible use of metrics. It doesn't allow the German impact factor to be used officially as a surrogate for quality. Many of my colleagues in my university in the different subject areas don't use German impact factors. I'm a historian, I've never used a German impact factor in my life, either as a librarian actually, because I've never worked on that side of the library world, or as a historian. We don't use impact factors. And many subject areas just don't use them. Some do use them and use them heavily, and particularly in life sciences, they're heavily embedded. And I talk to professors in life sciences and say, really not a good idea to use the impact factor. And they say, well, yeah, Paul, I understand all that, but there's just too much to read. I haven't got enough to read. I haven't got enough to read. I haven't got enough time to read everything. So I use the impact factor as a shortcut. If you take away that shortcut, give me another shortcut. I talk to other departments who could potentially use impact factors and don't. They say we absolutely don't use impact factors, and the way they have done it, and I'm trying to investigate whether this will work across the university as a whole, is that they don't expect their panels to read all the papers that are submitted in, say, a job application. They would ask the applicant to choose 5 papers, their best 5, or the 5 which the applicant thinks are most appropriate for the role they're applying for. And then they share the reading around a panel of people and aggregate the judgments of the panel and come to an academic decision that way about the academic credentials of the applicant. No German impact factors, lots of reading, but a shared endeavour. Maybe in an open science environment, that is how you get round using a German impact factor if it's not, as San Francisco says, the right approach.
How do we move from impact factor train a network. And the main problem, and the part of which you get more time, is to find data. For example, in the biomedical field, it's particularly hard sometimes to find the correct data for, obviously, for privacy reasons and so on. So I thought, imagine what would happen if all the people just from today will start to share all the data they have and that they can share, and how much I feel like the artificial intelligence can improve if from a day or another we just have to do this. Obviously, it's not that easy, but I see that our two things that are very going, they need to improve, they will go together. So it was just a consideration, but maybe I would like to comment from someone that knows more than me.
Can I take that one? In case did anybody catch the question? The rise of open data, how do we encourage perhaps the more broad sharing of data? When digital science built its citation platform, so we had about 100 million articles, we realized that there's like a separate part of digital science called Figshare, which is fairly famous. It's like Zenodo, except slightly cooler. And it's there as an open data platform. It'll give a DOI to any data set or anything. It'll make it shareable to the homepage. Institutions can customize it and all the rest of it. And we realized that we could data mine the publications that we have, 100 million publications, to look for the phrase data available upon request. And then we could potentially send an email to those people and ask for the data. So I think that kind of approach, which was technically quite difficult up to now, or has just never been done, it would go, I think, some way towards making it feel like a data revolution. Like all of a sudden there's all these data sets. It didn't happen accidentally. You make use of what you have and look for telltale signs like the phrase data available upon request or data available, and then almost machine-like, in compliance with GDPR, email the primary authors or corresponding authors and ask for their data and improve it somewhere. That's one approach that we take. The other one as well, I suppose, is mandates by journals or other publications. It's way harder to convince some of those publishers to do that quickly, and so it's sometimes much quicker to go to the researcher themselves, especially when the researchers are all as young and as handsome and attractive as you all are, and are more open perhaps to the open data principles in order to get it done quickly, even if it ends up being a third-party service. As long as that service is open, it complies with openness regulations.
When it comes about what to read, I think there is also an issue about what to read when you just want to keep yourself updated with the latest news in your field, and also from the life science. And that's true that we often would just discuss papers from Nature or Science and Cell because it's easier to find their better quality research. So I think it's a bit misleading to just say that at the moment the impact factor does not reflect anything about quality, because it's true that it doesn't tell all the story about quality, but it's also true that it's somehow correlated. And how can we substitute for that? Like looking for interesting things to read and how to address the possible threat that, I don't know, scientists will have to become more like scholars and be very present on social media to be successful, because that's not what we want to be. We don't want to sell just our facts or to oversell our results.
I would start saying, I don't have the graph now, but there's a very nice graph that shows how the impact factor works. And it will show for Nature, the curve showing a couple of publications getting a lot of citations, so being very relevant in a very long tail of publications that are never cited. It's true that if you're reading Nature, you have a higher chance of probably reading a very good paper, but you also might be missing out on a very relevant paper that goes somewhere else. So it's true you need to read somewhere. There are some nice tools right now. I used to use Sparrow when I did my research. It's Sparrho, and it will look everywhere in a set of journals. You tell it to search based on keywords, and give you like a news feed
So, being more Catholic in your information gathering, Catholic with small c, in your information gathering and using tools or an AI tool to pick out material from a wide corpus of literature which matches a profile that you set up. What I did when I first became a librarian was run STI searches, selective dissemination of information services, which did that on commercially produced literature. Replicate that in an open science environment. You've got another tool that will bring to your desktop a wider range of material than simply reading science literature.
If I could just add on top of that, I would start looking also at preprints. So, preprints attract so much community feedback that I'm not going to necessarily say that your judgment is going to be based on that community feedback, but you're going to see so much more opinions on the quality of research that that's going to help you shape your judgment in that aspect.
But I think most of the community feedback is just and that's not feedback, so it's more like
No, well, with feedback I really mean like open peer reviews, positive and blog posts.
rare case. I think most of them, I mean, what you see, for example, on Twitter is not really much.
But that's because in the life sciences we still have a long way to go. Because in the life sciences we're just like 5 years. Just a bit behind this.
Another, I think we have a couple more questions.
Is there any correlation between open science and quality of previous work? Would it be affecting the quality of the work being done in different times?
Maybe start by saying that if you're open and you're showing everything you've done, probably not possible about how you treat your data. It's not sure, but it would be easier for people to see that you've been
If mistakes are always possible, but they can be honest mistakes. So that's for sure.
I think my students say a couple of things. If you're engaging in those practices, it does show a certain respect for the research process and the transparency of what we're doing and the reproducibility of the results are good for research because that's good research practice. It doesn't mean that the outputs are better, but it means that the methodology and the process that you're using is sounder. That's the first thing. The second thing is, in an open environment, it's much easier to detect fakes or downright distortions of the because they're open to scrutiny by everybody. It's the closed world which makes it more difficult to unmask fakes because you don't see all the data and you don't see all the evidence that's supporting a set of conclusions. That isn't nearly so easy to do in an open world because everything's open on day one. So it's easier to spot fakes, in my view.
I have to dash for a taxi. That's my only contribution. Thank you, Barry.
okay, one last year.
I have a question. I think it's great. Sometimes I want to ask what are the implications the institutions doing about because it's very important and
Sure.
I think it's going to work
Sure.
they are not on the side of it.
Okay, so
It's not what we understand.
I'll have a go.
What's the question?
So the question is, what is the general position of funding agencies and universities or research performing organisations to open science as a changing phenomenon in the research environment? Certainly universities like mine, like the other 22 narrow institutions in Europe, we take open science to be an absolutely fundamental change in the way universities relate to society and how research is evaluated and shared. That's why we've written the roadmap, and that's why we want to, in debate at institutional level because of the very strong position that the Commission has taken and bodies like NERU and European Universities Association have taken in promoting open science practices. And we think that will feed into the rest of the world. But we acknowledge we're probably the leader so far. For funding agencies, similar story. Funding agencies are very, very strongly in favour of open science, of open access. They mandate open access to publications. They probably will mandate open access to data. At the moment, they strongly recommend it. They put in conditions in their terms of grant, which means data has to be available for inspection for a fairly long period after the grant has finished. And that's not quite the same as a mandate, but I think that mandate will come. Nobody's mentioned Plan S. It's the first. It was forbidden. First open science meeting, I think, all year or last year, but nobody's mentioned Plan S, which is the funders' plan to turn everything immediately open access from the 1st of January 2020, with no embargo periods for publications. So funders are absolutely up there, and universities are strongly following, but on a slightly different track, because we see it as a more balanced environment with more things to worry about.
I'm not going to mention plans, but I do have a question about where we're going. So we seem to be moving towards away from evaluation on metrics and quantification and towards incorporating open science into career and research evaluation. If that's the case, how do you see open science being used to evaluate excellence, research to excellence, specifically for grants like the Marie Curie and the EMC?
I don't, but define excellence, right? What is it? I mean, there's more than one article saying that the current definition of excellence is a bit fetish, and it's probably the trend in the near foreseeable future is going to enlarge it, grow it. I'm not an expert at it, I can't tell you this, but what I can tell you is that progressive professors and research group leaders that are around me, I'm at a technical university, they tell me if your young researchers can't go and win a grant as it is defined today, whether that's a good, bad, or a good thing or bad, if a young researcher comes out of graduate school and cannot win a grant, they are not research excellent. Right? That doesn't mean that they're not research excellent in the lab. That means that they can't handle the body of requests that the funder is throwing at them in order to guarantee that they have the environment to perform the research excellent part of the work. So I think we need to define what is excellence and then from that trickle down instead of skill sets that either the young future researchers will have to figure out themselves on their own and sink or swim, or we're going to formalize some kind of framework that will empower them to use it together.
My opinion, my very humble opinion on this is that I don't know anybody that can tick all the boxes at the end of the day. It's not you are all in it, completely all, or you're nothing, or you're out of it. You do whatever you're comfortable with. You do the steps, the little steps that you can afford to make. Ideally, also collaboratively with the colleagues that you work with your supervisors, with peers around you.
PhD thesis, that's the output of the doctoral research. It's a rule that there has to be a copy deposited in the electronic repository. That's a mandate. It isn't a mandate that is open. Whether it's open or not is left to the student. If the student in my university owns the copyright in the work they're producing. 80% of the students who deposit theses make them open on day one. 20% put on an embargo for a given period, but then they become open after that. So that's the choice of the student, and I'm sure that will be the same kind of model that we use for e-lab notebooks as well. It's absolutely up to the student and the supervisor